My guess is if you were to make your way to 3354 North Whitney Avenue in Hapeville, Georgia, you would find a little cottage. The people that bought that cottage were brilliant because they bought the lot next to it. They were the only house on the street that bought both lots. The lot next to it would be where I would grow up and play with my cousins and my brother. And in the back of that house, you would find a galley kitchen. One, when we first started hanging out there, had a door that swung both ways. And when you went into that galley kitchen, you would find a telephone attached to the wall. Something like this. Except hers was tan. My grandmother's was tan. But very similar. Not attached to a stick, that's for sure. But for sure attached to a wall. You would take such phone, and then you would push buttons on it. And as fancy, I know, fancy like. And you would push these buttons, and then someone would answer on the other end. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this right here is called a phone cord. And we're going to get there. And so however long this phone cord was is how far you could go and talk on the phone. Now, my grandmother's, hers was really long. It went, number one, it wasn't this level. Like, it was about right here, which she was a tiny little lady, so she had to, like, reach above her head to get the phone. But the reason she had it that high was because the cord was so long, because she wanted to make sure that as she was in the kitchen, she could be on the phone and be at all of the places in the kitchen. And so this phone, this is not going to do it on this one, but this phone had to go about 12 feet this way to get to the double oven. That was nice. And then it had to go all the way to the other end to get to all the cabinets, this, that, and the other. It didn't have to be long enough to get up there because she couldn't get to the top cabinets. She didn't give you a step stool. She had to get a step stool, then a ladder, and then she could get to the top cabinets. But either way, that's the way it is. And this phone stayed there. Like, it never changed. Like, it was always this phone forever. Like, until the house was sold and it was done with, the phone hung there. So it should still be there. It better be. I'm actually going to go by there this afternoon. Knock on the door and say, show me the phone. But you can get these really long cords, cables. And what would happen is, it was a little frustrating to me, is when you talk on the phone, and you're in the kitchen doing things, like you'll hold it like this, and then you'll realize you've got something, and this is in the way, and so you'll do this, and you'll go this way. And when you're done, you hang it up, and it's not going to do it for me now, but it'll start doing like this. And that's frustrating for someone like me who wants things to not be that way. And so I would come in, and I would try to untangle it, and the thing is that it untangles fine now, but it's already getting some memory. Just doing that, it's a little slanted. Is you do it enough and you can untangle it and it just goes right back to tangled up. And she didn't care. She didn't care, it bothered me, but nevertheless the phone. Now here's the thing, for those of you who are gifted enough to grow up in a house or at least experience at some point a house with a phone like this, if you go all the way back before cell phones, even before these things became wireless, which that blew my grandmother's mind. She could go sit on the porch and talk on the phone while she drank coffee. What? Unreal. But before all that, when it was just this, and you were expecting a really important phone call, it could be from a doctor, it could be from a relative that was out of state, and you were waiting on the phone call, and that's the only way they were going to get in touch. They could write a letter, and it would take a few days, or you could wait for the phone call. Now, what happens is you sit and wait by the phone. And it didn't matter what you had planned. You canceled the plans. It was like, I can't go anywhere because I'm waiting on a phone call. And you just sat there and you stared at it. And then you would stop looking because you're like, I get it. I watched Pot doesn't, what is that thing? Pot, you got it? Right? So I'm not going to look at it. And so you would stare at it, but you would know that's not going to work. And you would just wait and wait and wait and wait. But it just felt like it's never going to ring, you know? Just until it rings. And then hello? And then if you're talking to your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whatever, and your parents are sneaky, as you're talking, they'll pick up the phone and be like, and you hear that little click. You know what I'm talking about? And you're like, hey, get off the phone. If you got a sister or a brother, you're like, get off the phone, I'm on the phone. Anyway, that's what it is. Some of y'all are in trouble. You're confessing things right now. You should just keep it in the dark. We would rearrange our lives to make sure we didn't miss a call. Moses almost missed the call. This close. The story of Moses, though, doesn't start with Moses. It starts with a guy named Abram. What's interesting about Abram is, and we've got to understand this to really understand the story of Moses, Abram's short form ends up being Abraham. Big deal for the Jewish community, the Hebrew people, the Israelites. Abraham's a big deal. What's special about Abraham is that God makes him a promise, really a series of promises encompassed in one big promise. And in this promise, it's brilliant. Now, I was reading this a couple of weeks ago, and so it's not my wording, but I just thought it was really great. I wanted to share it with you. That God promised Abraham, and this is the way it's just kind of broken down, 3 promises. He promised a childless man a son. That was promise 1. He promised a landless nomad a country. And he promised an unknown man global recognition. Those are the 3 promises, all into one. A childless man a son, a landless nomad a country, an unknown man global recognition. We see it in Genesis 12, 1 and 3. This is God talking to Abraham. The Lord said to Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. God makes this promise, 3 huge promises. Fatherless man, a son. Countryless man, a place, a country. A nomad, a country. An unknown man, incredible global forever recognition. Like, this is a big deal. These are my promises I'm going to make you. And Abraham says, all right, I'm in. Let's go. Now, with this, though, this is important for us to understand, especially when we start thinking through how does God interact with humanity. God makes these 3 really great promises. Son, country, recognition. And with that, though, those all 3, everybody would say, those sound like really positive things. Like if God's involved in his life, and if God's involved in what he's doing through his people, those sound like incredible promises. Thank you, God. He follows that up with this, Genesis 15. Then the Lord said to him, to Abram, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. He tells Abraham, long before Moses is ever on the scene, this is generations before Moses. He says, I got 3 promises: son, country, recognition. However, I'm going to do those 3 good things, but life is still going to life with people. You can't just say, God, why don't you just protect me from all the bad things? Just give me the good stuff. God's like, I'm going to make you a promise, 3 good things, but let me also tell you what's going to come with these 3 things. Not because I'm causing it, but I'm telling you, this is what it's going to take for all of these things to take place. Your people that are going to be given this country are going to spend 400 years not in that country. In fact, they're not even going to be able to spend the time in the country because they're going to be enslaved. He tells Abraham, generations before Moses shows up, this is what's going to happen. And Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has Joseph. Joseph takes that family from Canaan to Egypt. It's a good thing at the time. A number of generations passed. They enslaved Joseph's family. Joseph's no longer alive. Generations later, they're enslaved. Fast forward 400 years, Jochebed and Amram have a baby boy that they've got to hide from Pharaoh, who is killing all of the Hebrew children because they've gotten too numerous. She puts him in a basket, puts him in the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter finds him, raises him, calls him, gives him the name Moses. And at 40 years old, Moses murders an Egyptian because he's beating one of his Hebrew brothers. He hides the body in the sand. Pharaoh finds out, tries to kill him for killing the Egyptian, and he runs into the desert where he finds a wife. He's married. We fast forward another 40 years. Moses is now almost 80 years old, and this is where we pick up in week 3. Moses just minding his own business. He was tending sheep because he was a shepherd. This was his lot in life. He brought nothing to the table. He was a prince of Egypt, but it wasn't something he was like, hey, by the way, Jethro, father-in-law, just want to let you know I'm a prince of Egypt. That's why your daughter should marry me. No, that was not a thing. That was not something they were having conversations about. He brought nothing to the table. He ran from Egypt with like the clothes on his back because he was running for his life. He didn't show up with a bunch of money. And so what has Moses done for the last 40 years? He's taken up the family business that he was allowed to come into. The one thing he did was he saved this guy's daughter at a well from shepherds bullying her and getting her off the well. Like that one thing got him in favor with the father-in-law, ends up marrying her. 40 years later, he's just a shepherd. That's it. Prince of Egypt. 40 years later, typically princes of Egypt are still princes of Egypt or Pharaoh themselves. And he has downgraded to shepherd. Not even a good shepherd. He's a shepherd in the desert, right? Like not even a shepherd like green pastures and flowing water. No, he's a shepherd where there's no pastures and no flowing water. In fact, the passage tells us that he has to go so far from where he actually lives. He's a long ways away from where his house is with the sheep, hunting for pastures and water. And he sees something that he has yet to see before. There's a bush. It's on fire. That's not what he hasn't seen before. He's seen that. He's seen a bush on fire. Not an uncommon thing. In fact, in the desert, it's dry, a little spark here or there, boom. I get it, it's a fire. But there's nothing else around, so it's not like it's gonna create a forest fire because they're not in a forest. They're in a desert. There's no such thing as desert fires. There's too much sand between the stuff that makes up what could catch on fire. Like sand doesn't catch on fire. It's not like, what's that movie where the lightning hits the sand and becomes glass? Sweet Home Alabama. We're not doing that. You know what I'm saying? It's just that. So Exodus 3, verse 2 says this. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight while the bush does not burn up. And so the thing that catches his eye is there's a bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up. Because typically in a desert, a bush catches on fire and it burns for a second and then it runs out of fuel. And when a fire doesn't have fuel, it stops burning. Like it just ashes out. It's just done. It's just over. And so he sees this bush and he's like, man, that bush has been on fire for a long time. And it's not getting any smaller. Like it's just staying the same. It's consistent. And typically a little bush like this, it just whoop, whoop, that's it. It's done. And so he gets closer and he's like, this is wild. This thing is still burning. And he gets closer and he's like, this is unreal. Now, what's incredible is we get 20/20 vision. We can look backwards and we can see how is this strange phenomena happening? How is this thing that's on fire continuing to burn like it's not being consumed by this fire? Well, it's simple. Because God. And this tracks. This tracks with the Israelites in this very moment. Pharaoh oppresses and abuses them, and yet they're not consumed by his oppression. And remember, we go back to week 1, and they're starting to grow so numerous that he says, look, we've got to do something to kind of squash this. And he says, let's enslave them, let's oppress them. And then what happened to them? It says they multiplied. In other words, what would typically take a people and what just absolutely demoralizes them, inspires them. And the only explanation for how these things work in this moment where typically if you were to oppress this enormous amount of people with this kind of slave labor, they would shrink. They would become less healthy. They would wither. But instead, the people of God continue to flourish. Moses is looking at this visualization right in front of him. And the answer is because God. Now, we get to verse 5, and God says this. It says, "Do not come any closer," God said. Moses is so interested. He's like, wow. And he gets a little closer. He's like, and he's just moving. And he gets closer and closer. And finally, God has to tell him. I was like, hey, personal space, brother. Like, don't come any closer. You are close enough. And then he says this, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." This word holy is huge. Enormous word. The first time we see this word show up in English in our Bible is in the book of Genesis. And it's used to describe when God makes the seventh day holy. And it's a big deal. God's saying, look, in creation, this is the creation narrative that describes creation on behalf of God. And he's saying the seventh day, we get to the seventh day, and I'm going to make this day holy. And then we don't see the word, again, or any kind of iteration of the word until we get here. Now, this is a little different, and not that God made something or declared something holy. This word is that it's already holy. It's already holy. Now, the interesting thing about what he's saying is that, hey, take your shoes off because you're standing on holy ground. It's not that the ground was holy and has always been holy. No, but it's that God's presence was there and he made it holy. It's not that he was going to declare something holy or turn something into holy. It's that he showed up and automatically where the presence of God was, that place was holy. And so he just lets them know, hey, when you're around me, you should probably take your shoes off because where I stand is different from where you stand any other time in your life. And so you can't approach me the way you approach everything else in your life. You approach me differently because I'm telling you, I'm different than anything else you've seen, experienced, or thought of in your life. Because when you got up this morning, the best thing on your mind was, you know what, I got to take these sheep on a long walk. And the best thing for me to do was put some sandals on because it's going to protect my feet. And I'm here to tell you, Moses, those sandals are going to do nothing for you. In fact, the best thing you can do is get them off your feet because of what I have made the sand you are standing on. And then God tells him why he should take his feet off. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, up until this point, this is interesting. Up until this point, Moses has seen this burning bush not being consumed, gotten so close that a voice had to say, chill, brother, don't get any closer. You are close enough. And then his response to that is, okay, I got you. Sandals off. So there's a voice, God's voice talking to him. The voice tells him, take his shoes off. He takes his shoes off. Moses is fine with all of these things. He's still looking at the bush. He's still interested in how is this happening. The voice is coming from him. He's obeying him with the sandals off. But this is what gets him. He introduces himself like, hey, I know I'm just a voice, but let me tell you who I am. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when he hears that, he says, oh, this is not good. I thought I was just talking to a burning bush, like it was good. Sandals are off, but I can't look. I don't know if he peeked because God can't see when you peek. You know what I'm talking about? You just look. But I don't know if that's what happened. He's like, this is not, I've never had this before, but this is not going to end well. You know what I'm saying? And that's his response. He's like, what in the world have I gotten myself into? It was just a burning bush. God gives them his credentials. And with that, he follows it up. He says, Moses, I've heard my people's cry. I've heard them in their anguish. And it's time to do something about it. And so he tells Moses, he says, I want you to go. I want you to go and free my people. Now, Moses responds. Moses says back to God, he says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He's like, but who am I? You know what I'm saying? Like, who am I that I should go? Who am I that I should go to Israel, Pharaoh, Israelites free? Now, this is interesting because if we just rewound the tape 40 years, what we would find is an Egyptian slave master beating the snot out of a Hebrew slave. And Moses saw that take place. And his brain said this, that's not right. I have the ability to do something about it. I'm going to step in. And Moses steps in between them. Things go nuts. Moses ends up killing the guy. And then he's like, I'm going to bury this bad boy in the sand. And I think I'm going to get away with it. Moses is all in on, don't treat my people this way. And I will kill someone if you do. And I will bury your body in the sand. That's Moses' mentality. Because I'm not going to stand for it. I'm not okay with it. Now, it changes the next day when he goes and tries to break up a little squabble between two of his Hebrew brothers. And they look at him like, oh, you're going to bury us in the sand too? Then all of a sudden he's like, oh no, everybody knows. Word starts spreading. Pharaoh says, I'm going to kill you for killing an Egyptian. How dare you? And then Moses runs. And so that has changed the mentality that Moses got. And so when he asked God, he's like, you want me to step in? You want me to go and do something about this oppression? I'm sure if I was Moses, I would have said, hey, do you remember Exodus 2:14? Were you there for that? Were you there for Exodus 2:14? Where the guy that I tried to break, the Hebrew guy, when I tried to break up the fight, looked at me and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? It's right there. It says, who made you ruler and judge? In other words, he's saying, hey, God, do you remember that they don't want me to be their ruler and judge? They don't want me to lead them out of slavery. They're not interested. So when I say, who am I mean, who am I? And honestly, they don't even know who I am to be able to do this. Now, I will pause here, and I will say that self-distrust can be an incredibly good thing. Like you being self-aware. Like incredibly self-aware to say, you know what? I'm just a wee little shepherd. And what am I going to do? Walk up to Pharaoh, one of the largest army heads in the world, one of the most powerful people on the planet, and say, I am a shepherd from the desert. You should let you should let those people go. What's he going to say? Self-distrust is good. However, if we stop at the self-realization, if we stop with self-awareness in and of itself, that always leads to paralysis. It doesn't lead to growth. Self-distrust is only good if it leads to better trusting God. Like for us to recognize, hey, I'm pretty sure I've got a good idea at what this is going to take, and I am also pretty sure I don't have it. So how do I make up the difference, God? I see the good that needs to be done. I see that I have an opportunity to do this good. However, I also know that I'm not quite equipped to pull off the good that I have the opportunity to do or the good that I see needs to be done. And so what do I do with that gap from my self-awareness and the good I know needs to be done that I have the opportunity to do? Like, how do I fix this? God, would you help me figure out the difference? And when that's a conversation that leads to, I need to equip myself some way, or I need to bring someone else in that can help me on this mission. I need to create a little bit of a team. I need to better myself. I need to grow myself. Is that there's a plan to figure out from here to here, and God will lead in that moment. But Moses is not in that moment. Moses is like, I am incredibly self-aware. I am barely making it as a shepherd, brother. Have you not seen how far I am from home? I'm just looking for something the sheep can eat. And you entertain me with a bush that doesn't go out of fire, right? Like, I am lost. I'm lost. And you're saying, go back to Egypt. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Okay. And God responds. God responds to him, and he just simply says this. He says, I will be with you. I'll be with you. So Moses is like, okay, well, can't argue with that. So he comes up with another thing to argue about. We go to verse 13. Moses said to God, suppose, isn't that interesting? He's like, let's just say I did what the God of the universe told me to do. So suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're going to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now, what's interesting about this is that Moses asked the dumbest question. He says, okay, well, let's say I go, and I get there and I tell them the God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he says, but what if they ask me what your name is? Ain't nobody asking him what his name is. When he says the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the first question is, I bet you don't know his name, though. What is this? What are you talking about? But God takes the opportunity. He takes the opportunity and says, look, okay. Dumb question, but I'm about to give you an incredible answer. God says to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're going to say to the Israelites. Quote, I am has sent me to you. Now, I am is a big deal. Now, it's much bigger than we got time to go into today, but I'm going to break it down to like three small little pieces. First one, and it tells us a bunch, but it tells us three big things. First thing it tells us is that whatever this person is, this I am, tells us inside of the language of I am, it tells us that number one, he's eternal. In other words, I didn't begin and I didn't end. And this is important. This is enormous when it comes to our theology and understanding of God. I am, when you have that name, it means I've always been. In other words, I have no beginning. So you wind your clock back as far as your clock could possibly be wound back, and then you still haven't even got to the beginning. Rewind it to that, and you still haven't got to the beginning. Keep going infinitely, and when you get to the end of that, you still haven't got to where I begin. Do you know why? Because I didn't begin. I've always been. But when did you start always being? I've always been. Like there's never a begin. I have started before you could start something to start something to start. And there was no start because I've always been. That's big. And by the way, not only did I begin, I'm not going anywhere. So you do whatever you want to. You can't get rid of me because I am. Second thing it tells us is that he's unchangeable. In other words, there's not a place in my existence that I'm different from who I am right now as you are experiencing me right now. And here's why. Because I'm always the greatest version of what you can be to qualify as God. And so there's never a different time in my existence where I was something different because I'm always the greatest. In fact, there's got to be a word better than great. We use a word called supremacy in the New Testament. It's a big word for Jesus. It only happens one time in the entirety of the Bible. And it's a big deal, supremacy. And it's even beyond that. God's saying, look, I'm so unchangeable because I'm always the very best supreme version of anything you can think of, and then take it to another level, and then take it to another level. Just like you can't get to the beginning, you can't understand just how good I am, and I'm always just like that all the time. And then he says, not only am I eternal, not only am I unchangeable, I am the divine authority. In Egypt, there's a lot of God options, lowercase g God options. There's a God of the Nile, God of the sun, God of the moon, God of fertility, God of rain, God of snakes, God of bugs, God of cattle. There's lots of gods. And he's saying, look, let them know. Lots of God options. none of them are what I am. And so Moses hears this name, understands all of those things in that name. Moses answers, but what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you? That's actually the first good thing he said. It's like, but what if they think I'm making this whole thing up? You know, like I tell them there's a bush, it's burning, and it did never not burn. And then I had to take my shoes off in the sand. And then it was God, so I played peekaboo with them a little bit. And then we talked, and it was, I am, big deal. And then like, that didn't happen. And so God says, yeah, great question. I'm gonna help you out with that. So Moses got this rod, and so he tells him, say, look, put the rod on the ground. And the rod became, it was a miracle. Just right there, rod became a snake. Like God's like, look, I'm gonna show him. And it was in this moment I realized that Moses and I are on equal footing. Exodus 4:3 says this: Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake and he ran from it. He and I are just the same. He was like, put the stick on the ground, and he puts it on the ground. Oh, good gracious. Burning bush, what are you doing? The burning bush got tricks. It's no good. And beyond that, he says, hey, pick up the snake. So he picks up the snake, turns back to the stick, and he says, hey, I got another one. Take your hand, put it in your jacket. Take your hand out of your jacket. And it was leprous, like just leprosy all over, eaten up with leprosy. And he says, now put it back in your jacket. And I pull it back out. And it was the first game of hokey pokey you've ever heard of in the Bible. That's all. I know y'all think nursery rhyme, no, God made hokey pokey. But that's what happened. It's also a little dance, you know what I'm saying? Murphy saw it. I can see Murphy vibing with it immediately. And then on top of that, he said, hey, and then you can go to the Nile, and you could take water from the Nile, and you can take it and you pour it on the ground, and when you pour it on the ground, I'll turn it to blood. He said, look, I'm going to make sure that they know that you're legit. I'm going to make sure you know you're legit. And so then Moses is like, okay, burning bush never stops. Bush is talking. The bush is the God of my father, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I haven't even looked at this bush in 45 minutes. I got a stick. It became a snake. I ran. I came back. I got the stick. We played hokey pokey. I got to get a cup to dip into the Nile, turn into blood. I am. What are my three things? Unchangeable. Always been, never began, never will end. And the divine authority. Got it. All right. You've answered all my questions, all my issues. God, were you aware that I'm not very good at talking to people? That's what he said. He said, did you know this? Like, I'm not even good at people. I'm not even good at, you want me to stand in front of Pharaoh, in front of all these people. Did you know that I'm not good at that? I'm not good at that. At this point, the Bible tells us that God gets angry with Moses. You think? And so in frustration, he's like, how about your brother Aaron? He's like, yeah, Aaron. He said, Aaron's going to meet you. Aaron's going to meet you. Aaron will talk. You take the stick. And then we get to the worst part of the story. After all that, Moses in Exodus 4:13 responds, but Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. He almost missed it. But the thing is like, he actually picked up the phone. He just wasn't happy with who was calling. And so he just wanted to hang it back up and pretend it never rang. Now, we know, because we get the gift of biblical history, Jewish history, when we hear and talk about the word Moses, it's never in this I'm too scared to move forward setting. Like it's not what we think through. It's we think about this we think about Moses and like, man, no, he was like a father of our faith. Like Moses, like isn't he the guy that like got the Ten Commandments? Yeah. Like isn't he the guy that like, wasn't there like the story of like a sea parting? Wasn't that Moses? Like, yeah, it was Moses. It's like, how do we go from this guy of like, yeah, you've shown me the bush, the talk, the sandals, the snake, leprosy, you're with me, always been, unchangeable, the divine authority. I get it, but I can't do this. Please send someone else. I think that feeling of I'm not good enough should resonate with us, because we get to see when we do Bible study that when God has a desire, when he has a set of instructions for someone who is following after him, when we see thoughts or obstacles that are opposite God's very specific instructions, it's very easy for us to connect the dots from the things that are opposite God's instructions are Satan's ideas. And so in this moment, when God's audibly speaking to Moses saying, this is what I'm calling you for, and Moses is saying, I don't think I want to listen to this part of the conversation, much less do something about it, those ideas were planted in him by the opposite of God, because he wants to do the opposite of what God has called and asked him to do. And so when we think through in our own lives these things where we see the good we ought to do in the name of Jesus, and we have the opportunity to do that good, but yet we've not figured out how to bridge the gap from what we ought to do and have the capacity to do to actually, figure out, well, this is where I've got to be to do. And so the gap in between, we've stopped with our own insecurity. We've got to recognize that our own insecurity and our awareness of it is definitely a God thing, because he gives us a self-awareness. However, he wants us to use that self-awareness to then increase our faith and reliance on him to make a way to do the good we ought to do. However, when we use our self-awareness to be, this is our stop sign, this is the ceiling for what we're at, we're not going to go beyond that, then the enemy begins to take camp there and says, hey, these are my seeds that I'm sowing. And I want to make sure that the seed that grows up creates such a canopy where you can't see beyond it to God's plans, because I've created this artificial canopy for you that says, hey, the sky's not the limit. The seeds I've planted in your life of your own inadequacies, those are the limits. And I don't want you to think, does God have a way to get me from where I'm at to be able to choose or achieve the good I want to be able to do and have the opportunity, just are a little short in capacity or maybe skills or aptitude, that he would say, no, I don't want you to focus on that. Focus on the fact that you're not enough, and you're not gonna be enough. In fact, the reason you're not enough is because you're not enough. Like, that's it. And the reason that you've discovered that is also because you're not enough. It's not because God gave you the ability to self-discover so that you could rely on him. It's because you know that you just don't measure up. And he will tell us that over and over again. And there is so much good that ought to be done by a kingdom-minded person that is stuck in this canopy of Satan's seeds, canopy and tree and forest. Then all of the good is beyond it. But we are stuck. We're stuck. And we're just saying, God, if you want me to do it, don't. Just send someone else. God is trying to tell Moses, Moses, it makes perfect sense what you're saying. You're almost 80. You're a shepherd, and not even a good one. You're a shepherd in the desert. Your own people said get lost. Your adopted family said get lost. I get it. I get it. Your environment, your makeup, your genetics, your talent, your circumstances, all point, I should get someone else. However, let's just push pause. It's Father's Day. What would it feel like if Moses' daddy, Amram, or his mom, Jochebed, what if they got a chance to listen in on this conversation? Like they just got to kind of like camp out and say, let's just watch our boy interact with God. You know, let's just see how this conversation, and they're just sitting there listening. I'm sure they're just like, they're chilling. They're like, oh, he has no idea that that's our God. He has no clue. He's going to find out though. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, he's hiding his face. He gets it, right? He gets how big a deal this is. Aren't you proud of him? Like, yeah, I'm proud of him. And he's like, hey, he drops the snake. He's always scared of snakes. He's always scared of snakes. And they're watching it happen like, why does he have so many excuses? This is so strange. And then as it starts to set in with the two of them, they're like, he just keeps coming up with excuse after excuse. Why is he doing this? He's gonna miss it. Like, does he not know that at some point God's gonna stop asking? Did he just say, send someone? Did he say send someone? Did I hear him? This is Jochebed, his mama. Boy? Think about it. What would she say? She'd say, well, Moses, excuse me. I get shepherd, not even a good one, in the desert. I get it. 80 years old. I get it. Your people didn't want you. I get it. Your adopted family didn't want you. I get it. We can tell those stories, but let me tell you a story, Moses. Let me tell you a story. The granddaddy of that Pharaoh that wanted to kill you, guess what? It wasn't new. He wanted to kill you before you were born. In fact, there were thousands of other boys that were born the same year you were. Guess what happened? He killed them. But guess what happened to you? We took you and we hid you for 3 months. And then when we couldn't hide you anymore, I made a little ark and I made it waterproof. And I took you and I put you in the reeds in a very strategic place because I had faith that God had something for you. And then guess what? Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe. And guess what Pharaoh's daughter does? She finds you in the basket. And guess what? She opens it up and she sees you. And you know what she sees? She doesn't see a baby that's been discarded or deserves to be thrown into the Nile and murdered. She sees a son that she wants to raise. And then guess what? And then God arranges for me to nurse you. And so I get to start raising you up in some of the most important years of your life. And then I have to give her back to you, but you get the greatest education in the entire world. You grow up as an Egyptian. And then you're a prince of Egypt. But you're not just any prince of Egypt. You're a prince of Egypt that when you saw injustice, you know you couldn't stand for it. And so you stood up for what you knew was right. And yeah, you made a mistake. You took it too far, but you still knew, I can't stand for this. And yet for the last 40 years, you've been wandering around the desert. But guess what? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has only had a conversation and appeared to one guy in the history of the last 400 years. And who was it, Moses? You. What do you mean send somebody else? Boy, you better tell him, yes, sir, and get to walking. You see, the greatest moments or movements in our lives begin with acknowledging our inadequacy and our need for God to make up for it. And it is a tragedy when we stop at our inadequacy. There's always two sides to every tragedy. What happens and how God will use it. And so often we stop at what happens instead of how God will use it. And so we have to be careful not to insult God with our inadequacy. This is a truth we should remember. The greatest movements in our lives require two things: a call by God and a faith to answer.